The UK government has proposed some improvements in the online safety bill with an aim to provide stronger protections for children, tougher measures to protect women, at the same time protect free speech online. The safety legislation had been in the works for several years. It was stuck in the British Parliament for over 18 months and now the government has reintroduced it with certain changes. It includes stronger protections to keep children safe, new duties to support free speech and also give more powers to the users. The question is the legislation stringent enough to make the UK the safest place for users online, as is being claimed by its government? Also, does it strike the right balance between safety and free speech? That's what we'll discuss on this edition of the Global Debate. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teena. To discuss further the changes made to the UK online safety bill, how will it keep internet users safe and also counter online harms? I'm pleased to welcome an illustrious panel of experts. Ms. Elisabeth Braw, Resident Fellow, American Enterprise Institute, London, United Kingdom. Ms. Mallory Knodel, a Chief Technology Officer, Centre for Democracy and Technology. She joins us from the US. And Dr. A. Nagarathna, Associate Professor of Law, National Law School of India University, Bengaluru, India. Thank you to all panelists for joining us on this edition of the Global Debate. Ms. Braw, let's first try and understand from you what changes have really been brought about to the current version of the online safety bill, which has been reintroduced in the UK Parliament, and how does it benefit the users?
Yeah, as you say, Teena, this legislation or proposition has been in the works for a long time, including under the previous iterations of this Conservative government. And the previous country secretary, or one of the previous country secretaries, Nadine Dorries, was very much a champion of this legislation and proposed a version that has now been watered down. And specifically what has been watered down is the legal but harmful content, and much to the annoyance of many, but to the satisfaction of a number of conservative backbenchers who had been concerned that this bill would impede free speech. And I think that the complication with this bill or this proposed legislation is that it combines keeping children safe online, safe from online pornography and so forth. It combines that with trying to police or trying to regulate illegal content, and if you look at the European Union by comparison, they have done that in two separate efforts, and so their new regulation for online content addresses just the illegal content, which is now has been banned, and platforms are obliged to take it down. But really, at the end of the day, this comes down to the major challenge we have in our modern societies, which is unvetted content. Back in I think when all of us on this program were growing up, there was media content put out by established media organizations that did vetting, and today we have a completely different scenario. And I remember in 2008, it must have been back when I was a technology correspondent based in San Francisco, I went to visit Twitter, which was then a tiny company, I think 10 people, and it was clear to nobody that social media would go on to play the absolutely crucial role they play today, but yet nobody has figured out how to ensure some sort of standard of accuracy and of course remove online remove harms from that online content.
Clearly, you're right. The fact that internet and all of these social media platforms, Ms. Knodel, today have become such an integral part of our lives that we ourselves are not aware of the kind of threats that they pose to us, our lives, and our near and dear ones. So the fact that online safety is something that every country is grappling with in its own way. There are huge challenges. Every country is coming up with one or the other legislation which may be similar or different to each other, but nevertheless the purpose is the same, to make online safety a priority. To that aspect, first of all, let me get in your opinion on the UK's online safety bill At the same time, if you could also, make us and our viewers aware about what's really happening in the US. How is the US working towards making online place safe, especially for the children?
Yes, and thanks so much for having me. So the Center for Democracy and Technology is based both in Washington and Brussels, and we've come out against the UK Online Safety Bill, just to your first question, mostly because we feel it takes an overbroad approach to things like governing these issues through censorship. So it does, I think, overstep some free speech grounds, but more importantly, we're very concerned about how this policing of content would work in end-to-end encrypted systems. So not necessarily social media, although some social media providers also offer messaging that is confidential and private and secure. Therefore, being able to identify content that would violate its policies in end-to-end encrypted environments would be also an overbroad measure that would violate human rights on the internet, not just freedom of expression, but also right to privacy, right to information, and other things. So that's our major concern with the bill. It also has some pretty unfortunate age verification issues that would possibly also expand social media companies' ability to surveil and gather data about its users, but also then give the governments vis-a-vis the social media companies that information as well. In the US, because you asked, we actually work fairly globally, but also in the US, these issues are being grappled with. There is a proposed legislation in the US also at the moment that we have almost exactly the same concerns with. We're concerned about the framing that children will be made safer if everyone else gives up their privacy and confidentiality. We sort of feel that that's a bit of a false frame. In fact, even children are made safer by end-to-end encryption and the ability to have confidential and private communications. We feel strongly that that protects everyone, and eroding that in a way that gives companies more access as well as governments more access is not a safer world. And so we push against these policies. But I do think that it's important to make these spaces safer for children, and there are a lot of ways that social media companies and technology in general can innovate ways of doing that. And some of those things are present in the bill, both the UK Online Safety Bill and the bill in the US that's similar. So it's unfortunate, I would think the approach should be similar to what Elisabeth was alluding to. It's important to separate these out to really protect privacy and confidentiality online for children as well, and not put those things on the table. We would also be concerned about overbroad age verification requirements for all content, for all users. And so therefore, there are ways in which we can make these bills stronger for their aims, but it's very hard to do that when those risking encryption are present in those bills.
Okay. Dr. Nagarathna, coming to you for your perspective on first the provisions of the UK Online Safety Bill, because there are certain things that are being hailed, there are certain challenges which are being also cited. The fact that all of these social media platforms largely have been self-regulated across the world, but there have been incidents and unfortunate ones in different parts of the world which have raised calls that self-regulation is not working, and perhaps there are measures required seeking accountability. Do you agree that that there needs to be a fine balance when it comes to seeking accountability from each of these media platforms, internet user providers? Because at the end, children today, and especially post-pandemic, they have unlimited access to internet, and it's time that we regulate the content that's available on the internet. Dr. Nagarathna? Dr. Nagarathna, am I audible to you?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
So that question was for me.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I see, at the US attempt in form of this bill is similar to the strategies adopted by most of the countries, including India, as you were also mentioning. So this is one strategy or an attempt done by almost every country, as you've already mentioned, because of increase in the various forms of online abuse, especially to ensure that children are safer on the online platform. So the attempt seems to be similar to most of the countries, including Indian. Good or bad is another issue. Of course, there are questions relating to freedom of speech and expression, privacy concerns. So all these are there, which needs to be legally addressed, and it is essential that we are able to bring in a balance between these conflicting concerns. One is of ensuring online protection of everyone there, especially including someone as vulnerable as a child. And on the other hand, the freedom of users. So internet users, freedom of speech, expression, and privacy. At the same time, holding the intermediaries responsible is also essential, but to what extent and in what manner is something that we're all struggling to handle. And I see it's almost similar to what we've been trying since years in India, is also the struggle that is being faced in other jurisdictions, including you take Germany or US also. There's an attempt to come out with a new bill, and now UK is almost there. So this is almost similar, but of course, it's essential that we balance the conflicting concerns. Now, how we've addressed this in the offline scenario is the laws have developed over the years. For example, the police officers' search and seizure power, states, crime regulation powers and strategies as against individuals' rights, etc. So the jurisprudence or the law on this has evolved over years. And even in India, like CRPC has undergone a lot of changes. So now you at least have some tests that are adopted by the courts. It can be about declaring validity of a law, constitutional validity of a law, like that. So I think the same is the struggle we're seeing on the online platform. So we'll have to come up with a balancing strategy, and I think that will still take time, because we'll have to evolve with some tests. For example, we've done that in the context of right to privacy in India. In the recent case of Puttaswamy versus Union of India, Supreme Court has laid down a formula on as to when and to what extent state can interfere into our privacy, including online privacy. So something like that needs to be well developed when it comes to online platform. So at this stage, I can say that we've also been struggling to handle this issue, and that in India, you can see in form of amendments we have done to intermediary guidelines. We amended it in 2018, again in 2021. So there's a lot of criticism, similar to the criticism now we are hearing about the UK bill. Right. Similar criticisms are also made as against the intermediary guidelines in India, which was amended in the year 2021, where the state now has an authority to ask for information about the originator of a message. If you need such information to maintain security, sovereignty, integrity, or to protect child or women against abuse.
In the UK, there was a major pushback when the bill was brought about the last time. So after the furor, Ms. Braw, the bill had to be taken back with some certain, changes. The bill has been reintroduced. But the fact that does it put to rest the larger debate about striking the right balance between curbing free speech and at the same time regulating damaging content? The fact that there are still grievances over encryption, how do you think that's going to be addressed in the days to come? Because that is something that the critics will continue to highlight as well. Ms. Braw?
They will, and Teena, the next frontier, so I think everybody in the whole world would agree that we need to keep children safe, but really the next step is how we regulate the enormous amount of disinformation and misinformation that circulates online. And we should remember that this is not just a nuisance. It has real world effects, causes real world harm. The 6th of January, just this week, the attempted far-right coup in Germany, which was again fed by disinformation and misinformation, and this issue pops up every single day. The Hunter Biden laptop story, for example, that was suppressed by Twitter because Twitter thought it was a Russian disinformation campaign. Turns out that was not the case. But we don't have no country at the moment has an answer to has figured out how to monitor and I hesitate to say police, but keep an eye on the information flows that reach every single one of us. And unfortunately, as a result of that disinformation, misinformation reaching so many people act on it. And even if they don't act on it, it creates divisions in our society. It creates distrust of our societal institutions, including elections. So this is a really urgent issue to address, but there is no clear solution to it because we don't want a Ministry of Truth. Nobody would want that.
Right.
But somebody needs to play that role of the old-fashioned editor who vetted information before it went into the newspaper or onto the television channel.
Right. Dr. Nagarathna, the fact that, challenge is even more bigger for a country like India, considering the huge demography, number one, and the fact that the pace at which we are digitalizing. So 65% of population in our country is young. Who has unlimited access to mobile phones, laptops, internet, social media access, and there is urgent, immediate need to keep a tab on what's actually is accessible to them. So, I mean, let alone what the UK is doing, what the US is doing, but I think perhaps taking on from the best practices of what they do, we have to adapt to that even faster. Would you agree?
Yes. So when it comes to India, so there's a lot of other things that can be strategized and planned. It's not just making a law or amending it so as to empower the state with more and more power. More than that, what is required is amending the procedural laws. What we've only been focusing on is amending the substantive law. In the sense, we are redefining what abusive content is, what CSAM, sexually explicit material is, abusive material is. So more than that, what is required is re-looking at the way we investigate, we detect, we prosecute these offences. While amending these criminal law provisions, we are ignoring the procedural aspects. Most importantly, what is required is the collaboration between countries, and collaboration between public and private partnership is also important. And that again takes us back to intermediaries' responsibilities and obligations. And in addition, as I was mentioning, collaboration between countries. Now, most of our social media platforms function from Western country. So at times we find it very hard to even access evidence from them. So that's another thing that India and countries like India and developing countries are struggling. And so more than amending law, I think what we require is collaborations with the countries, maybe in form of mutual agreements, etc. So otherwise the struggle will continue, and laws are only changed on papers and can't effectively be implemented.
In terms of effective implementation, let me go back across to Ms. Knodel. Dr. Nagarathna speaks about collaboration between countries, and that's quite significant because we've earlier on discussed how it's not a local problem, but it's global in nature, and the solution also has to be global. So in that regard, what kind of international collaboration do you see countries actually, having when it comes to addressing this problem? How can countries which have had similar laws, which have been able to effectively ensure that, online safety is priority, how can they help the other countries who are trying to struggle and deal with this problem today?
You're bringing up a really important point, which is that there is no easy solution. There are going to be so very many different approaches that we have to take to this problem, and a lot of it is going to fall down on cooperation. Cooperation across jurisdictions, as you're describing, and across sectors. So obviously we imagine that technology companies will be helpful partners in all of this to governments who are looking to solve these problems for democracy and so on. Also, I think we shouldn't forget the role of academics and folks who are trying to really measure the problem and understand its scale and understand how it's really been effective over time. You mentioned the failures of self-regulation. I think that that is maybe an oversimplified statement, but I wouldn't disagree that we're in a situation we are right now because tech companies for a long time failed to act. Then as well, I think we have to consider cooperation with civil society and those who are really looking at the folks most affected by these. We often think of children as a broad category or other marginalized groups as a broad category, but we also can't forget how important it is in an age of just general civic unrest for a lot of parts of the world, how journalists, how activists, how other dissidents are protected by a global free flow of information with privacy and security controls in place at the technical level. So we can't discount those really important functions of democracy either. And I would just say, lastly, to one of the important elements to remember is that while tech companies can be partners, and obviously we'll have many different solutions, many different approaches, no one solution is going to work out. Yeah. We really mustn't place too much emphasis on technical solutions. The reason why we can't rely upon pure technical solutions for some of these problems around disinformation is that from a technical perspective, we really can't define disinformation versus other forms of legitimate speech. It's very technically difficult to tell the difference, even if you're a highly trained AI, which a lot of the AI that's running at scale on all of these social media platforms is not a very highly trained AI. It is really difficult to tell the difference between satire and disinformation, between someone making a political statement against a piece of harmful content or someone using that harmful content to manipulate users. So those nuances matter quite a lot, and computers and technical solutions just are not fit for purpose in these very specific cases around free speech. So we have to imagine that these are social problems. We have to not place too much faith in the technology to be the solution. I think that's one of the reasons why we keep having this fight over encryption, because encryption, we've realized, or some have said, is both the problem and it must also be the solution in ways that just don't acknowledge how the technology actually works and what it can provide. Really, and so if we can get a little bit more realistic about the limitations of technical solutions, I think we'll land on more lasting social cooperative governance solutions that will help.
Ms. Braw, so a whole lot of complex issues intertwined together, and we all know there can't be one fit-all solution to each of these issues that Ms. Knodel has highlighted. But the fact is, in the UK, in India as well, there have been incidents wherein you will have larger groups of people, especially concerned parents about their children, because and especially in social structures like ours, it's important to keep child safety at the foremost. So I think even more than striking the right balance, there is need to ensure that no matter what, this is one aspect that cannot be fiddled with. So in that regard, do you think the UK online safety, because it also provides a triple shield protection, is something that will do justice to at least some of the family members who've been fighting towards this cause? Ms. Braw?
I know it will give a sense of closure to for example, the parents of this young girl who unfortunately committed suicide after reading or seeing rather a lot of seeing and reading a lot of suicide encouraging content on social media. Molly Russell was her name, and they have, or in particular her father, has been campaigning very strenuously for some sort of legislation. And even though this proposed legislation isn't perfect, at least there would be more protection now. But his experience, or his and his wife's experience with her online use, just highlights how difficult this or how treacherous this whole field is. So they monitored her online use, knowing that she was prone to depression, and they had access to her social media accounts, but she had then set up a different set of social media accounts that they were not aware of. And so how much parents, we all want to do, we all want to protect our children, but it seems like, the more we try, the more opportunities there are for them to be exposed to that harm anyway. And so from that perspective, this proposed legislation is a good, but albeit perhaps not a complete step.
Clearly. Okay, Dr. Nagarathna, coming back to you to understand the fact that we've also been trying to bring about similar legislation, similar kinds of measures to ensure child safety, safety of women, and more importantly, because there have been some incidents of child abuse that we've reported on, the fact that all the more important for us to work together In that aspect, you spoke about international collaboration. I would like to draw your attention to the kind of domestic collaboration that we can have with the government, with the tech companies and the law enforcement agencies, perhaps to, create child-safe cultures is what is important for a country like ours.
Yes, I agree. So what is required is, the contribution from all these stakeholders, including the intermediaries as well as think tanks. A lot of stakeholders can involve in achieving this objective. And again, something like this did happen in a case that went before the Supreme Court of India. It's called Rape Prajwala case. There were a series of PILs, public interest litigations, which were filed before the Supreme Court, which was all about online abuse of children, including, say, video recordings of children being raped. So in this matter, the Supreme Court did ask the social media platforms to file affidavits and explain as to what steps they have taken and they can take in future. So through the affidavits, a lot of social media platforms, including Facebook and all, have shown their eagerness to regulate these kind of abuse of children on the online platform. So they do talk about using AI, artificial intelligence, kind of a tool in regulating, filters in place, etc. But then, in a country like ours, with multilinguistic and many other diverse factors, it's very hard to implement any of these solutions.
Right.
So again, solutions like this can only be continuing in nature, can never bring an end to the menace. So yes, so that attempts are also happening, and yes, collaboration is important between various stakeholders, as my co-panelists have already mentioned, between academia, even most of these stakeholders who
right.
can directly or indirectly.
The important thing to understand here is, and which we have seen in aspects of different countries, we've been talking about cases in different countries that have happened, which have led to calls for making online place much more safer for children. The fact that investing in child safety measures, especially when it comes to the digital space, it's today not an option. With the way technology is evolving, it is the need of the hour and need for countries to keep pace with this evolution at the earliest. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you once again to all my panelists for joining me on this edition of the Global Debate, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. Absolute pleasure to have you three on the panel today. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you same time next week with another topic and a different set of panelists. You take good care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.